the night that would forever haunt Richard began like any other weekend. As a young boy, he relished the privilege of staying up late and watching television until he drifted into slumber. His parents had a rule that allowed him this small pleasure, and he cherished it. Little did he know that one fateful night would shatter the tranquility of his childhood. The clock ticked relentlessly, and the dimly lit living room was his solitary sanctuary. The rest of his family had retired to their rooms, leaving Richard alone with the television's soothing glow. His eyelids grew heavy, and his mind began to wander as his thoughts danced in the twilight between wakefulness and sleep. Just as Richard teetered on the precipice of dreams, a sudden, eerie noise disrupted the stillness of the night. The creak came from the porch of his house behind the living room. Startled, he bolted upright on the couch, his heart pounding like a drum. The source of his disquiet came into view, visible through the bay windows that provided a glimpse of the porch. An old-fashioned swing moved back and forth with an eerie and unsettling rhythm. As if propelled by an invisible hand, the swing was not alone in its sinister choreography. It carried with it an even more chilling sight. In sheer terror, Richard felt his throat tighten, and he crept toward the bay windows, desperate to see more. His trembling hands parted the curtains just enough to catch a better view of the horrifying spectacle unfolding on the porch. Seated upon the swing was a woman, her haggard appearance suggesting she was in her 50s. Her nightdress was soaked with a disturbing amount of blood, rendering it a sickly shade of crimson. What gripped Richard's heart with a vice-like fear was the sight of her gnarled hands, clenched around a formidable kitchen knife. The woman's eyes were vacant, lost in a world of their own, and her blood-stained lips moved as if she were whispering to some phantom presence only she could see. An overwhelming surge of dread coursed through Richard's young frame. He knew he had to inform his parents of the nightmarish scene playing out just beyond the window. Scrambling away from the window, he bolted towards his parents' room. His heart pounding in his chest, he burst into the room, a breathless, incoherent mess of sobs and gasps. His parents were jolted awake, their faces etched with concern and confusion as they saw the terror in their child's eyes. Desperation and dread fought for control as he finally managed to stammer out the details of the horrifying sight he had just witnessed. His father's brow furrowed in annoyance and disbelief. He dismissed Richard's words as a mere nightmare and told him to return to bed. However, the boy's panic was too palpable, too raw, to be ignored. He refused to be placated and continued to wail in terror. In the face of his son's mounting hysteria, Richard's father relented, though reluctantly. Annoyed, he seized Richard's arm and dragged him towards the front door. The young boy's shrieks and protests echoed through the silent house, but his father was resolute. He would prove to his son that there was nothing to fear, that the night's terrors were mere figments of an overactive imagination. Finally, they reached the front door, their footsteps the only sound in the otherwise quiet house. Richard's father turned the lock and swung the door wide open, expecting the darkness of the porch to reveal nothing more than the benign night. "See," he said sternly, "there's nothing there." However, before the man could finish his sentence, he caught sight of something that sent a shiver down his spine. The woman on the porch had not been a product of his son's imagination. She was real, all too real, and she was sitting on the swing, drenched in gore, the enormous knife still clutched in her blood-smeared hand. With a guttural gasp, Richard's father slammed the door shut with a force that made the windows rattle. He felt a cold sweat break out on his brow, his face pale with terror. He quickly instructed his wife to call the police and, with a determination that contrasted his earlier skepticism, he returned with a 12-gauge shotgun, loaded and ready. With measured caution, he cracked the door open just enough to allow the barrel of the shotgun to protrude. He addressed the woman, his voice quaking. "Who are you? And what are you doing here?" The woman turned her eyes toward the door, her bloodshot gaze locking onto both father and son. In a trembling voice, she croaked, "Someone killed my husband, but it wasn't me." Her words hung in the air like a sinister omen. Richard's father, still trembling with fear, informed her that the police were on their way. Panic coursed through the woman's features, her grip on the knife tightening. With an unsettling swiftness, she rose from the swing and turned to leave, her tattered nightdress billowing as she moved. Minutes felt like hours as they waited in silence, their ears straining for the distant sirens that signaled the arrival of the authorities. The police found the woman mere moments later, as she desperately attempted to break into one of their neighbors' houses. her ghastly presence casting a long, sinister shadow over the quiet neighborhood. As the woman was taken into custody, her chilling revelations still echoed in their minds. The horror of that night would forever haunt Richard, casting a dark veil over his innocent childhood. Never again would he sleep in the living room, for the porch swing had become a harbinger of unimaginable dread, forever etching its horrifying memory into the fabric of his soul. As it turned out, the woman was mentally unhealthy and forgot to drink the intended medication. During the night, she had a big fight with her husband and ran away from the house. Taking a knife with her, she tried to harm herself. Dylan and his wife Martha had been looking for their dream home for several years. They dreamed of a home to call their own, where they could start a family and make lasting memories. In February 2010, their dreams came true when they found a charming home located in the serene suburb of Lakeview Heights. As soon as they saw it, they immediately fell in love. The house had everything they wanted and more. A cozy living room with a fireplace, a spacious kitchen, a bright and airy bedroom, and even a small but charming garden in the backyard. It was the perfect place to start their new life together. The first month after moving in went smoothly. Dylan and Martha spent all day painting and decorating the house, making it unique. The joy of home ownership filled the air and their new life was just beginning. But then strange events began to happen. It started with small occurrences that they didn't pay attention to at first. Items from the rooms upstairs seemed to be rearranged in the middle of the night, ending up where they shouldn't have been. At first, Dylan attributed these oddities to his wife's forgetfulness, thinking she was absent-mindedly rearranging things. In addition, the house began to creak, and not just occasionally, as they do in old houses. They were loud, almost otherworldly sounds that echoed through the night. One evening, as Dylan and Martha were preparing dinner in their cozy kitchen, an unpleasant moment occurred that shattered their sense of security. The stairs leading to the top floor were right next to the entrance to the kitchen. As Dylan turned off the faucet, a sudden guttural cough reached their ears. Their hearts pounded. They had no children, no visitors. The windows were closed, the television off. A cold shiver ran down Dylan's spine and his face lost color. He exchanged a frightened glance with his wife, who looked as pale as he did. It was clear that there was someone in the house and they were upstairs. Panic set in. Martha hurriedly grabbed her cell phone and dialed 911, while Dylan, shaking with fear, reached for the sharpest knife he could find. Dylan took cautious steps toward the stairs, his senses heightened, while Martha on the other end of the wire dictated the address to the operator in a trembling voice and described the events to come. Their house had become like a maze with ominous corridors and hidden secrets. With each step, a creaking sound came from the house, increasing the tension. Suddenly, a sharp pop or crackle pierced the air, similar to the sounds he often associated with the settling of the house. His heart raced as he stood at the foot of the stairs, realizing he was not alone. The police were on their way, but fear gripped him in the darkness of the house. The cops arrived a few minutes later, their patrol car parked nearby. An officer with his gun at the ready cautiously climbed the stairs, his voice trembling but sounding determined. "This is the police. Is anyone upstairs?" The silence that followed was deafening. Dylan followed the officer, both carefully checking each room. The first bedroom was empty, as was the bathroom. The last room was Dylan's office and it was also empty. A feeling of relief swept over him, and he couldn't escape the thought that he had made the officer search their entire house for nothing. They were about to leave the room when suddenly it happened. There was another ominous creaking sound right above them, increasing their fear. Dylan's heart raced and his body tensed. He looked up and saw the entrance to the attic, partially hidden behind the closet door in his office. His thoughts swirled in alarm as they approached it. The officer, showing great courage, called out again, "Is anybody there? It's the police." But there was no answer. With a determined nod, he turned on his flashlight and cautiously climbed the attic stairs. In the dim light, they saw a man in his 40s kneeling in the attic. His gaze was disturbingly blank, and he did not seem in the least disturbed by his presence. The officer quickly drew his gun and, in a firm voice, ordered him to come out and put his hands behind his head. The arrest was made quickly, but the intruder did not utter a word during the whole time he was detained. He looked disheveled, dressed in dirty clothes that smelled of desolation. Dylan and Martha were horrified to realize that the homeless man had secretly moved into their house while it was still for sale. The realtor had carelessly left the door unlocked during the showings, giving the man the opportunity. The man admitted to living in the house for a month without their knowledge, hiding in the attic. The revelation sent shivers down their spines, and the sense of security that Dylan and Martha had initially found in their dream home had crumbled, replaced by a lingering sense of unease, as they pondered the unimaginable intruder who had lurked in the shadows of their newfound happiness. The question remained, what other secrets did their charming house in Lakeview Heights hold, waiting to be uncovered? The nightmare had just begun, and the eerie echoes of those initial creaks would haunt them for years to come. The McCullough family lived in a quaint two-story house on Elm Street. Shelley, the oldest of the siblings, was a responsible 16-year-old girl, charged with looking after her 6 younger siblings when her parents had to run errands or go to work. On a cold Saturday afternoon, the sun cast long shadows on the snow-covered landscape outside the window. The younger siblings were engrossed in a movie, and Shelley sat with them on the living room couch with her back to the window facing the street. Everything seemed to be business as usual, and nothing seemed to portend a sudden and unexpected turn. While watching the movie, the silence of the room was pierced by the shrill ringing of the phone. Shelley picked up the phone in surprise, and her heart raced when she heard the voice on the other end of the line. It was their neighbor from across the hall, Mrs. Johnson, her voice trembling with concern. "Don't turn around," Mrs. Johnson pleaded, fear audible in her voice. "We're looking at your house right now, and we can see you and your siblings watching TV. We can even see the back of your head as you sit on the couch." Shelley furrowed her eyebrows and exchanged perplexed looks with her younger siblings. A slight panic began to encompass Shelley. She didn't realize what was going on. "Okay," she replied, her voice shaking with excitement. This is very strange. Why are you keeping such an eye on our house, Mrs. Johnson's voice became even quieter, her fear palpable. "Shelley, please listen carefully," the neighbor whispered. "We see a man standing right behind your house looking out the window of the room you and your siblings are in. Do not move. Don't do anything. We've already called the police and they're on their way. Just stay where you are." Shelley's heart pounded in her chest. Her neighbor's words sent shivers down her spine. She looked back at her siblings, who were staring at her with an expression of confusion and fear. She pulled them close to her and nestled her eyes against the television screen, hesitant to turn around to look at the window behind her. The fear and realization of what was happening made her body petrified and like a statue directed toward the TV. Minutes passed like hours, and the tension in the room became unbearable. The sound of sirens drew closer, growing louder and louder, seeming to envelop the entire house. The siblings strained to hear the police coming, praying for their safety. Suddenly the red and blue lights flashing outside flooded the room with an eerie glow. Shelley could hear the muffled voices of the police officers, the crunch of their boots on the snow-covered ground. After a few agonizing minutes, there was a loud knock on the door. The police had arrived. Shelley, clutching her siblings tightly to her, slowly made her way to the front door. When she opened the door, she saw two stern-looking police officers on the doorstep. They quickly looked around the living room, making sure the children were safe. "Are you all right?" one of the officers asked. Shelley nodded, her voice shaking as she recounted a disturbing phone call from a neighbor. The officers sprang into action, searching the premises and checking for footprints in the snow around the house. It was obvious that someone was lurking nearby, their presence marked by footprints leading to every window in the house. Shelley and her siblings huddled together, a sense of unease hanging in the air. Eventually the policemen returned, and one of them said, "We couldn't find this man. He fled the scene as soon as he realized we were here." The family breathed a sigh of relief, but the feeling of unease persisted. Who was this mysterious man, and what were his intentions? Why was he watching them, lurking behind the house? The questions remained unanswered and unsettled. The police officers assured the family that they would keep an eye on the neighborhood and urged them to be vigilant. They left, promising to increase patrols in the neighborhood. When the police officers left, Shelley locked the front door and returned to her siblings. The ominous encounter had cast a shadow over their sunny Saturday, and they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The incident remained a mystery, a chilling mystery that continues to haunt the McCullough family, keeping them wondering what darkness lurks on the snowy winter streets of Elm Street. Now each of their days passed, in perpetual fear that they might meet this man with unknown intentions. The parents tried to leave their children alone at home as little as possible after the incident.